Top of the morning to you and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Meanwhile, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres is warning that a handful of donations won't correct the dramatic impact of the end of the deal that had allowed the safe passage of Black Sea export of Ukraine grain for the past year. It comes after Russian President Vladimir Putin told African leaders he will gift them tens of thousands of tons of grain within months, despite Western sanctions, which he said made it harder for Moscow to export its grain and fertilizer. Now let's talk to Dr. Kunle Olawunmi, retired Navy Commodore, head of the Department of International Relations and Diplomatic Studies at the Christian University of Abeokuta. Good morning and thank you for making out the time to be with us.
Good morning and thank you for having me.
Obviously, one of the issues on the front burner for the African countries at the Russia-Africa summit with President Putin will be this grain supply as it affects Africa. Now, there's been talk of alternative land routes called solidarity lanes through Bulgaria, mainly through Poland, using land traveled and trucks. There's been talk of using maritime corridors through the tributaries of the Danube as well. But this is certainly not enough, as the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is pointing out. Should there be more of a priority or an imperative for a return to the Black Sea grain deal for these countries, including Ukraine, or should focus now be on seeking alternative routes?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I believe that the issue of the grain deal, I think, is being overhyped indeed, because if you look at the global supply of grains, Ukraine supplies just about 5%, while Russia supply close to 20% or thereabout. And I actually listened to the program yesterday, where the Russian president was talking to the at St. Petersburg. He actually promised an alternative for Africa, because I think that is our concern. He's ready to ship grains, wheat to Africa free of charge. That is not going to have any shipping costs. I think that the Russian president is trying to do what I regard to as a global reset. Most of the hypes about the Ukrainian grain, the deal, I think is most of the Western media propaganda. I think it's not really as bad. So I think the alternative route is going to add to the cost of transport and the risk of passing through some of the frontline states, they're going to pass through some of those states. How safe are they? I think they're not really far away from Russian missiles as well. So I think we should not pay too much attention to the politics of the grain deal, particularly in Africa.
Mohill? But I want you to listen now to the, hold on, Doctor. I'd like you to listen, and our viewers to listen to what Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, had to say about it concerning the Black Sea grain deal. Take a listen.
It is clear that when taking out of the market millions and millions of tons of grains, it is clear that, based on economic laws, that will lead to higher prices than the ones that would exist with the normal access of Ukrainian grains to international markets. And this increase of prices will be paid by everybody, everywhere, and namely by developing countries and by the vulnerable people in middle income and even developed countries. So it's not with a handful of donations to some countries that we correct this dramatic impact that affects everybody, everywhere. We need to be pragmatic. We need to do things that are possible. And we are doing every effort we can to guarantee the access of both Ukrainian and Russian food and fertilizers to global markets.
Secretary General Xu Dezhi with China's.
Therefore, Dr. Olawunmi, so do they, A, focus on a return to trying to get Russia back to the negotiating table to restore the deal, or B, forget about Russia, throw the baby out with the bathwater, and focus on alternative routes?
Yeah, I think for Africans, I want to speak for Africans. The Europeans' politics and rhetorics on the grain issue is one way. The Russians will not allow such arrangement because they also supply wheat. I told you just now that the Russians produce more than 20% of the grain. The global share is 20%, while that one of Ukraine is about 5%. Russia is willing to reset the global commerce. And I think Africa should pay attention not to swing with some propaganda on this issue of grain. It's going to be more expensive if they are going to, open another corridor. The Black Sea is blocked, and Russia is making alternative, is offering us an alternative solution. So for Africa, I think we should just go to where it's cheaper and is going to benefit us. After all, what is our gain if we want to take side on this issue? I think we should remain neutral and get the grain where it is actually cheaper and easy for us. What is important is for Africa to be self-sufficient in food production. Though it's difficult not to take side in the kind of situation we are, but I think we should be pragmatic. And if Russia is offering us free shipload of grain, I think we should take it and leave the West and their allies to contend with other issues. We don't have any serious stake other than for us to be focused on our welfare and food sufficiency in Africa. By and large, I think we should also learn from this. Africa should try to be self-sufficient and stop going cap in hand all over the world looking for food. We have the largest land space, agricultural space. The AU, I don't really know what they do there. I think they should just put their acts together and leave the Western and the Asians to solve their problem. Wherever it's benefit us, that's where I think we should go.
Indeed, I'm sure many developed countries wonder why Africa is not yet food sufficient. Food for thought, Doctor. Now, during the Vietnam War, one of the horrors of that particular enterprise was the way the Vietnamese, the Viet Cong at that time, used to booby trap their own country and suck the Americans in with horrific traps and booby traps and mines that left people without limbs, without legs. And up till this day, you have people who have relatives or even people like that from the United States who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's a very terrible thing. In the case of Zaporizhia, where the sappers, as we reported this morning, the Ukrainians who are trying to demine that area, find that there's so much shrapnel and they can't do that effectively and efficiently. What's your impression? And I feel for both sides on this sort of trench warfare. What's your position on this concentration of these two sides, especially with the cluster munitions on this trench warfare, the use of mines, and now the introduction of booby traps and the cluster bombs and munitions?
Yeah, this is war, and every side wants to have an advantage. For me, if you study the Second World War, the First World War, we have a situation like this, even outside the Vietnam issue, where the Germans, encounter something like this, and they developed what they call the maneuverish approach. They call it blitzkrieg. What the Ukrainians should do, because I watch and I'm so perturbed with their tactics, why should you continue to move on a front that is hardened? They should take alternative routes. If that place is hardened, then you should not continue to move in that axis. There should be alternative for them, because the amount of mines the Russians have laid there is just to tell you that they are not really interested in moving forward, but they want to maintain their position. So they are actually initiating a stalemate for the Ukrainians, bogging them down, while the Russians have opportunity to open another flank, as I said. And look at what they are doing in Africa. Look at what they are doing in Asia. Outside the battlefield, outside the theater of operation, the Russians are doing extremely well. Look at how many countries they've lined up. And I think the West should begin to think outside the box. The Russians are very smart. They just put mines everywhere and use long-range artillery and missiles. Once in a while, they use their fighter jets to just keep on making them busy. They are throwing in more ammo tanks. They are flushing them out. The issue of mines is something that will show you as a tactical commander that the enemy is not really prepared to move forward. So you now being bogged down at a minefield, trying to clear it, is going to be very expensive. So I think the Ukrainians should change tactics and leave the mines alone and conduct what I would call a maneuvering approach. You have to change the mind in warfare. If you see that you have a challenge that is very formidable, what you need to do, if you're a very good commander, is to change tactics as well. If the only is to bog you down, then you should conduct what I call maneuvering approach. Blitzkrieg. Go through other flank, left flank, right flank of the minefield and achieve your objective. Nobody can win a mine. Even in the next 50 years, you're still going to see those mines there. Let's assume that, okay, Russians have ambition. How are they going to navigate their minefield as well, even though they may have the map? So it shows you that they're not planning to move forward. So you should not be bogged down there. There are other objectives. Crimea is there. The northern part of Russia is there. So they should leave the minefield alone for now and use maybe air assets to clear them instead of this painstaking effort I've been seeing in the past few weeks.
That's the exact issue that is discussed concerning the air support that Ukraine has been asking for the past few months and since last year concerning the F-16s. You mentioned the World War II and the Blitzkrieg. I think that involved the German Air Force, right? So, am I correct? Hello?
Yeah, that was the concept of the marginal time. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, please go on. So my point now...
Yeah, it was the marginal time that was designed by the French, you know, a very fortified defense by the French to keep the Germans away. What they simply do, what they did was to just avoid the defense line and went behind the enemy lines and achieved the objective. It was the French marginal line concept of defense, which is what the Russians are actually doing as well. So I think the Ukraine should learn from the Germans and avoid defense.
So now, Dr. Olawunmi, that means that their counteroffensive and their defense is dependent on the supply of these military assets from the West and from America and from the countries that say that they will supply F-16s. But doesn't that then therefore now mean that this war will continue to be protracted? Because they're estimating as far away as maybe 6 months before they can get any F-16s and before the pilots can be ready and before the support on the ground will be ready for air support for the Ukrainians.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what we've been asking for the past 3, 4, 5 months, that the air asset is very essential in this war. when we were talking about armor tanks and artilleries, I suggested on this program that what they need is air assets. Because if you throw in a lot of armor tanks, they're going to use long-range artillery, long-range missiles, rockets. They're going to use UAVs to knock them out. So it is overdue. The issue of air assets is overdue. However, this war cannot be won on the ground. The war cannot be won on the ground. No matter how much assets the West throw into that theater, it's not going to be won on the ground. This war will be won when the West are ready to negotiate. Or, as I've said before, when Russia implodes from within. And I don't know why it's taking the West so much time to be able to perfect the idea of making Russia to implode. This war is going to be protracted, it's going to be long. Even if you bring the F-16, I know tactically the F-16 cannot withstand the Russian fifth generation fighters. So I don't even know whether that is going to be helpful. The Sukhoi series of the Russians definitely will outweigh the F-16. And mark you, they're not going to give them the modern F-16. We're talking about F-22 Raptors, we're talking about F-35, and you're still talking about F-16, where the Russians, the opposition, have fifth generation combat fighters. So I think we should not deceive ourselves that throwing in more F-16 is going to give any serious advantage to Ukrainians. The Russians have the capability to knock out those F-16s on the runway or even in their hangars. So I think we should begin to think of a better strategy, which I think is going to come through negotiation if the West are willing. This war is going to continue forever if you continue to train in more arms, more weapons. And I think that we should begin to look at the United Nations now. I don't know what they are doing.
Yes, Dr. Olawunmi, sorry, if I may jump in there. Sorry, if I may jump in there. That's exactly the point I want you to emphasize in your closing submission. Finally, to you, we have come to a situation where we can't see the forest for the trees because of all the fighting, because of all the aggression, and because of everything that's happening on both sides. Not many people are talking about mediation anymore. Where would you like to see a restart of these negotiations?
It's a very complicated issue. I've always told people that the price for the West is Crimea. That's the price for everything you are seeing here, the control of Crimea and the Black Sea. If you take the Crimea away from Russia, it's going to weaken them. It's going to be a difficult negotiation. And that's why I always suggest that if Russia can implode, maybe we see a respite. Negotiation, how do you negotiate Crimea out of this issue? The 20% they've taken, about 18% now with the effort, can be negotiated. That's the Donbas regions can be negotiated. I don't see how you're going to convince Russians to leave Crimea. And I know that is the price for the West. They want Crimea so that they can control the Black Sea, because whoever controls that Black Sea has a great strategic advantage. So negotiation, yeah, it's possible, but I think they should just maybe take out Putin or disorganize Russia in a way that they can break into another 5 regions. And I think it would be faster that way. Yeah.
Taking away Crimea, that's the hard sell in any negotiations with the Russians. Thank you so much, Dr. Olawunmi, for your perspectives this morning on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We've been talking to Dr. Kunle Olawunmi, the retired Navy Commodore, Head of Department of International Relations and Diplomatic Studies of the Christian Universities in Abeokuta. Many thanks for your time today.
Thank you.